Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Collar here, along with ESPN's Kevin Seifert. And I'm not even going to waste any time with an introduction, small talk. How you been? Well, how's your off season going? Is Kirk coming back, Seifert? What's going on?
I have been every time someone asks me that, I've maintained that it's more likely that he is than he isn't, and that could even be like a 51% to 49%, because there's interest on both sides, and a lot of time in these negotiations and discussions, you already know that one side is just checked out, and I really don't think that's the case on either end. But it'll come down to, and I feel like we could have said this months ago, but is Kirk gonna if Kirk does what he always does, then he's gone, which is go find establish his value and find the best offer for him. I don't think the Vikings are going to be in the close enough financially to make that happen. If he sort of I don't want to say hometown discount, but if he's really truly willing to do to you know kind of finish out his career here as he says he wants to, then he might end up here under a smaller deal that will still make him very rich. But you know, it does feel like it's going to require something entirely different from him than we've seen throughout his career. So if we want to bet on something that's totally out of character, then that's what we would have to do.
How much do you look into what we heard from Kevin O'Connell, the entirety of it, from the podium to the sit down to on television, which I noticed even Good Morning Football was breaking down every word that Kevin O'Connell said. And I didn't think it was crazy different from anything that he
Right.
had said previously, but there were a few new things that he tossed in, including taking a shot at the tampering that goes on in Indianapolis. Hey, Kev, I'm sure the Minnesota Vikings have never snuck in a
No.
word with anybody there either. But
Yeah.
to add that to it, and then to say, kind of he's earned the right to hit free agency and so forth. But we all know once he hits free agency, it's very, very likely over for him in Minnesota because of that dead cap hit kicking in. So did that sway you in any way, or are you still staying with it's around 50-50, but slightly leaning to a comeback? Like, did that influence how you feel about it after seeing what he said on television?
I think he's just being realistic. Like I took that as just being realistic, like not like acknowledging that and giving Kirk, the space to that he really, has earned the right to be a free agent and to have this choice in front of him if he chooses to make it. But also like a lot of people have, locked in on the tampering part of that or locked in on the other there's going to be other teams without hearing sort of the sales pitch that he's slipped in there by noting what Kirk's record is. I think he said it was 17 and 8, but I think it's 8 or 18 and 7, but I think it's 17 and 8. But regardless, Kirk's had a better regular season record since Kevin O'Connell became the Vikings coach than he's had in the rest of his career, which is basically 500 to that point. And noting the weapons the Vikings have and the offense and the places it could go. So I felt like he was trying to be in the world of the real, but also making clear that like he still wants him back, and he is almost arguing that this is the best place for Kirk to go if he wants to realize some professional success, the maximize the professional success. We can argue whether that's the case or not, but I would I don't think I can ever remember a head coach advocating to be starting over at that position uh, when he's had a successful run to this point, and the prospects for a replacement are at best uncertain. We don't know the name of the next Vikings starting quarterback if it's not Kirk Cousins yet, and it puts a lot of pressure on the ensuing couple months to be able to come up with a suitable answer if that's the case.
And so I came away with, I don't think they know, was my big takeaway.
Yeah.
And what his television comments confirmed for me was, yeah, that's right. That they really don't know what Kirk Cousins is thinking. And all they could do is say, look, we like you and we would love to have you back, but the offer is going to be what the offer is. And
Yeah.
it doesn't sound like, and again, I was watching this clip from Good Morning Football, and something that was brought up was they didn't say at any point, "Hey, we're all in on Kirk. You know, we want him back and nobody else, and he's our guy, and all our eggs are in that basket." It was, "We love him. We'll bring him back." But you know, this quarterback class,
Yeah.
and there was a lot of that. We met with a lot of them, and we liked a lot of them. And I thought that some guys at the combine really did make their case, including JJ McCarthy, who I thought probably had the strongest week of anybody. And all the buzz was about him coming out of it. Michael Penix came out and threw lasers at the throwing session, which, you know, everybody already knew, but I thought he had a really good workout and so forth. So, you know, can you get sold on one of those guys? So there's always been a little bit of this hedging toward, well, it's a negotiation. Well, he's going to have other offers, not, hey, we need him back by any means, which if you're Kirk Cousins, now this is the challenging part, but I think interesting, is to get inside the brain of Kirk Cousins and try to figure out what does he really want? Because throughout his career, he's mostly been accused of just wanting the most money and what the dollars represent and so forth. But what I've continued to come back to is Kirk, we've been around him long enough to know he really knows what every team is doing. He knows their players, he knows their rosters, he knows their timelines, he knows their coaches' systems. Like, this guy loves football.
Yeah.
And if he's looking at these other rosters, how does he not come back to Atlanta's just got all these players and players under contract and an offensive coordinator who comes from LA working with McVay? Like, everybody that I talked to said Atlanta makes more sense than Minnesota, and I just can't disagree. So I think if it's about trying to win for Cousins and try to wash away the I can't win in the playoffs, I can't win divisions, Atlanta is a situation more built for that than Minnesota at this moment.
Well, but you also have to consider, like in his mind, like how much can he know about Raheem Morris? How much can he know about Zach Robinson? And compare that to how much he knows about Kevin O'Connell, and I guess Josh McCown, you know, and Wes Phillips, obviously, and Justin Jefferson. How much does he know about the Falcons receivers compared to what he knows about the Vikings receivers and the Vikings tight ends compared to the Falcons tight ends and the Vikings line? So like I think that I would imagine that he would also think along those lines as well. Like what I've, you know, whether it's money or not, like what I guess the way I boil down to what I think he wants is he said he wants to finish his career in Minnesota. He wants to hear from the Vikings through their offer that they want him to finish his career in Minnesota. And you can't really convey that by offering 1 year guaranteed. And you might not be able to convey that by offering 2 years guaranteed because he's talked about playing into, you know, for 3 more years. I think there was an interview he did earlier off season where he said, you know, a good number is 3 more years and then go year to year after that. So he's talking about playing from age 36 to 39, basically be guaranteed through that. Now, is there wiggle room in how guaranteed is defined and commitment is defined? Probably, but I think that's the easiest way to think about what he truly wants, whether it's from, you know, Atlanta is probably going to have to offer that in order to lure him, or at least, you know, throw out, you know, unofficially let him know that that's what would be coming if he would, you know, if he would hang on and not sign with the Vikings. But ultimately, I think that's what he wants. I think he wants the Vikings to convince him through their offer that they want him to be their quarterback until he's done playing.
And I think that that is the biggest hurdle for bringing him back for the
Yeah,
Vikings is
right.
that they have never been comfortable with a long-term extension for him, and they've had multiple opportunities to do
Yeah,
so. If you're not doing it after a 13-win season where he ties the record, ties or sets for fourth quarter comebacks
yeah.
and wins 13 games and puts up good numbers and gets along with your coach and emerges as a leader and Netflix loves him, then why would that be different after going 4-4? Aside from that, Kevin O'Connell feels like he was getting the offense more, but that was the time to sign him to a 3-year extension.
Right, and then the other part of that is like you add going 4-4. He's going to be a year older, and he had his first injury, significant injury, and you can say that was a freak injury and non-contact or whatever, but like the actuarial tables will tell you that that's just more likely to happen at his age moving forward. And I thought one of the biggest takeaways from Netflix was how much, you know, how open he was and how visual it was and visible it was, how much his body, you know, gets abused as it is. And so like I thought that was like an underrated part of their decision, after after the 02 season to not sign him to a long-term deal because I mean, the guy, like, yes, the guy's had no injuries, but undoubtedly has just been crushed physically, over the years by nature of the position and the way he plays the position. And like, you know, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is using a process that's very data driven. Um, and the numbers will tell you that the longer you play, the more likely you are to be hurt. And so that's another thing to think about is like, yes, the Achilles itself is going to be healed. And I don't think anyone has any anticipation otherwise, but like you're just in a period of your life, you know, Tom Brady, I guess, being the one exception, but um, where it's more likely that he's going to encounter injuries that would either limit his performance or prevent his performance. So another thing to keep in mind that the Vikings would have to keep in mind for. And look, and I don't think it's necessarily a wrong decision to say, look, we can't guarantee you 3 more years. We want you back, but like that's too much, for where our process and where our structure is, and they part ways on that, and then that kind of like puts Kirk, I think that stamps Kirk Cousins sort of who he is, and this is not a negative, but just says like that's ultimately like he's gonna go where um, the money represents the commitment, regardless of what the other unknowns might be.
Think that when you look at some of the other teams that are listed as potential Kirk buyers, you can make a desperation case for all of them. So Atlanta, clearly, they haven't been in the playoffs since 2017, and their
Yeah,
owner is 81 years old.
yeah.
I mean, I think, and he's worth 8 billion or something. I think he'd be willing to give Kirk some guaranteed money, and it might, if you squint, remind you of Matt Ryan. If you look at the Denver Broncos, I know their cap situation's messed up. But Sean Payton comes from New Orleans. We know that if you want to make it happen, you can make it happen. And he worked with a quarterback, again, if you squint, lacking mobility, accuracy, highly intelligent, in New Orleans with Drew
Yeah.
Brees. I'm not saying he's Brees, but if
No,
you squint, right, and they want to win, Walmart takes them over. They've got Sean Payton. Like, are they going to draft and develop JJ McCarthy for 3 years? And Vegas, they won 8 games with Aiden O'Connell starting. Pittsburgh, Mike Tomlin might actually finally feel some heat there. So there's a lot of teams, I think, where you could say there is a really good reason for them to sort of bend to the will of Magic Mike McCartney.
there is. When you were talking about that, though, like we mentioned earlier, like what does Kirk Cousins know about Raheem Morris? And like there's an uncertainty maybe there. He has a reputation as a very an awesome guy to play for, awesome guy to work for. If you're an assistant coach, if you're in the build, like creates this great culture. And like whether his strategic approach to coaching will be successful, I don't know. But like that's what he has always had a great reputation for. Like playing for Sean Payton is hard, man. Like he's a great coach and like potentially Hall of Fame, but he came from the Parcells tree, and he's that way. He coaches you hard and not nicely. I don't think he would ever want to tell you that he was being nice. And so it would be quite a culture shock to go from Kevin O'Connell to Sean Payton. So like whether that's like I really question whether that's going to be an option or whether that's a smart option for either side. But in the end, if you perform for Sean, you're going to be great. But Drew Brees is going to the Hall of Fame. He's one of the best quarterbacks of multiple generations, and I don't know that Kirk, anybody would put Kirk in that category. But I you know, it only takes one though. Like you don't even need the bidding war to get you what you want from one team, because that one team is going to know, intuitively, if not explicitly through the tampering, that you're going to have to come through with multiple guaranteed years at a competitive quarterback salary. Our Bill Barnwell said if Kirk Cousins is on the open market and there's a bidding war, like you're talking 50 plus million a year, just because that's, it's so rare that a quarterback um, is on the open market of his caliber. And Joe Burrow got 55 million, and he had multiple more years that he was locked down for, and they could use the franchise tag on. So those are important distinctions. But I don't know like how many teams there really are, and like we'll see if the Falcons truly are, or if everyone's just sort of everyone's sort of feeding at the same trough there, and building that potential up beyond to where it actually is. But it would really only take one to get those numbers to where they would be beyond what the Vikings appear willing to do.
So let me throw a couple options at you if Kirk leaves, what they'll do at quarterback, and you tell me if you like it or not. So the first one is the trade up option. I mean, I don't think you need to put in a whole lot of effort to see why Kevin O'Connell would love someone like Drake May. I mean, Jaden Daniels maybe, obviously he's super dynamic, but Drake May is a playmaker. He's got a gigantic arm, and the comp for him, best case scenario, is probably someone like Matthew Stafford. You can really see it. Is it worth trading multiple draft picks to get up in a draft where a lot of teams need quarterbacks? A lot of teams are making that phone call. But if you're looking to get your guy to pair with your quarterback head coach and his new square jawed quarterback coach, Josh McCown, that would be the option to get your guy that you fully buy into.
And I think I don't want to say that's what they have to do, but if they've previously made this value judgment, a defensible value judgment that we can't be all in on Kirk Cousins, who has the high floor and maybe the low ceiling, and we get into all that. But if you've made that decision because it's not sound, then and you're still on a track to hopefully build a Super Bowl winning team, I don't think you can hedge on what's next. Like, I know there's lots of other spots that they need to elevate on this roster, and there's limited ways to do that. The draft is always the top reason to do it. If to get up into that third pick in order to ensure you get, or maybe fourth, I don't know, but probably third, to get one of those guys is going to really hamper your next couple drafts and going to really tax the coaching staff to get the most out of some non-blue chip players that are going to be filling out your roster. But you're not going to win the Super Bowl by hedging it and saying, okay, we're going to, I don't think, by that's too expensive. We can't have Kirk. That's too expensive. We can't trade up into the first few picks because that's too expensive. We're going to find a guy that nobody else values as much, and we're going to put it all on Kevin O'Connell and Josh McCown and Wes Phillips and Justin Jefferson, another important part of this formula, to make him better, to maximize whatever that player's ceiling is. And so maybe they think they can do that. That seems like an awfully aspirational goal. And so that option, I think, if Kirk ends up leaving, and they'll be hamstrung because everybody's going to know, they don't have a quarterback. They might sign maybe you'll get to this. They might sign a Sam Darnold-ish type guy to hold it down until the rookie is ready. But they will have to do that. Almost have to do that if their goal is going to credibly remain to win the Super Bowl.
Right.
At some point in the next 5 years, I should say. Yeah.
Some point in the next 50 years, people would take.
Yeah.
As far as the price is going to be immense. You're not going to get a deal because there's going to be a lot of teams that are trying to trade up, and you're going to have to put a lot into it. But the one thing that I come back to justify that is that the weapons that they have already being in place, a lot of times that's the hardest part. You draft a quarterback super high, and you're like, okay, well, who did Sam Darnold have for receivers with the New York Jets when he got drafted there?
Yeah.
And you go oh, okay, you got no linemen, you got no receivers, but good luck to you, buddy. I look at somebody like Joe Burrow as a good example. Cincinnati had no defense whatsoever, but they did have couple of receivers, and then were able to add Jamar Chase to that eventually. And their defense was largely built through free agency. I think it's a lot easier to put together those players and to develop guys like we've seen with Metellus, Bynum, than it is to find a Jefferson, find a Darisaw, find a Brian O'Neill. So the fact that those pieces are in place, if the guy works out, you can have an elite offense and build that defense through the money that guy gives you with his rookie contract. So even though the sacrifice is significant, that side of the ball, I just think is easier when you've got money to work with because there's a lot of defensive players in free agency. Now, the other option is to stay at 11 and see what happens. I
Mhm.
am not fully convinced that McCarthy is going to be the top 10 pick that everyone is saying. Seems like he might be a Kevin O'Connell type guy. We could develop his mechanics, but you can't develop his heart. Uh, there's also maybe a debate for Michael Penix has a rocket arm, which could be pretty attractive for throwing the ball downfield. Bo Nix is the robot quarterback that you put in, he just, tell him what to do and he's going to operate it. So, you could see something attractive about any one of those guys or even an option. Well, we'll get to the different option. What do you think about just waiting to 11 and taking your favorite guy who's there?
You get what you get, and like the chances, and given how uh, aggressive teams typically are to get quarterbacks, you're just messing with fate. And maybe you'll get lucky. Maybe some teams will have different evaluations than you do. Uh, Patrick Mahomes I think the Chiefs traded up around 11 or so to get Patrick Mahomes, and Deshaun Watson was around that way too. And that's one of the better draft classes of quarterbacks that we've seen in a few years over the past 10 or so. So you certainly like it's not like you're picking 25th and that you're going to have to either get a second tier guy or you're not going to get a quarterback. But like, I don't know, man, like, especially the way everybody says, well, there's a great quarterback class, you just get whoever the next guy is. But everyone has been kind of planning on this for a while. And so I think there's a lot of teams that are going to be maybe not as explicitly and overtly interested in, or not as obvious of a quarterback need as the Vikings. But I think they just be taking fate into their hands, and like you're really trying to thread a needle to assume that everyone in the world knows you need a quarterback at 11, and like somebody isn't going to trade up to 10, and I think that happened. There was somebody, I'm trying to remember what the team was, but ultimately back when in the year of Sam Darnold getting drafted and Baker Mayfield and Josh Allen, I think Josh Rosen was number 10. And so and that group was all thought of as like, who knows who could be the number one pick. And then, the NFL knew, and, while maybe Baker Mayfield wasn't the top quarterback that year, Josh Allen was. Josh Rosen most definitely was not. And people in the league knew it at that time.
Well, and that's one thing that's really hard to factor about this is because I can watch them throw at the combine and be like, oh, I really like Penix. And they might run an MRI on those knees and be like, no, you
Yeah.
don't. You
Yeah.
like him as a fifth round pick. And we saw this with Will Levis last year. We saw this with Malik Willis, where the mock draft community was just generally very bad at knowing where these guys were going to go and tended to overrate them by quite a bit.
Yeah.
So is McCarthy the guy that's being wildly overrated, or is somebody being underrated like Bo Nix? It's just really hard to tell because even I looked at this based on the mock draft database. It was kind of all over. It was very scattershot. Like even with Patrick Mahomes, the mock draft consensus had him as like a late first round draft pick, and
Yeah.
then Kansas City trades way up. And a lot of those folks were like, "Is Kansas City crazy? What are they
Yeah.
doing for this
It's
guy?"
yeah.
And so that's just how impossible it is. In a theoretical world, it would make sense to just pick 11 and leave it to like football gods take the wheel. But from an organizational perspective, how would you go to your owner and be like, "Hey, nobody knows, so we just took a guy." Like
Yeah.
that's not how it
Yeah.
works. Like you have to be in total alignment for a decision like that and totally sold from the GM to the owner to the coach to the offensive coordinator to the quarterback coach. And that seems to be harder with the guys who are on the second tier of this draft class.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to say, so if you stayed at 11 and Kirk Cousins had gone elsewhere, you'd have to say there's at least four guys that we would take at number 11. The top three guys that'll be long gone, and then a fourth guy, and then if that guy's gone, is there a fifth guy we would take at 11 and make him the fifth quarterback taken in the top 11? Maybe their evaluation would be that there is one, and then they could probably feel comfortable. Or, well, more comfortable, but again, like does because they'll have that target on their back, like that doesn't preclude somebody from trading up one spot ahead of them to, or two spots ahead of them to get that guy out. So I just think that you have to be like, if that's the path you've chosen, you have to be, to use a modern phrase, very intentional about it. And you can't just like, it wouldn't seem to be good team building to just say, okay, moving to plan B, and plan B is, we'll get what we get. Like that doesn't feel like, uh, and I honestly don't think that will be their plan. Like it sure feels like, just knowing the way that their processes have gone. Like I think that they have very hard cutoffs, and they have very, uh, uh, straightforward plans. Sometimes those plans are to stick around and wait and see if somebody will offer them a trade to go down. And that we've seen that play out before, but I would be surprised if that's what they do, unless there's just a more than a handful of quarterbacks that they're, in their judgment, are worthy of taking at number 11.
Oh, and I am curious about that because we did hear Kwesi Adofo-Mensah say that they've had their eye on this quarterback class for years. Well, they've only been in charge for 2 years, but that would, to me, suggest that they had an idea that it's more than just a 1 or 2 man class,
Yeah.
that there were multiple players that they would be interested in. And this is the thing about the second group is, we've tried in the past to talk ourselves into a Sam Howell, a Kenny Pickett, a Mac Jones, for example. These guys, I think, are legitimate prospects. I mean, when you
Hmm.
look at their tools, their production, the worst thing they're saying about Bo Nix is he didn't throw enough long passes en route to completing almost 80% of
Yeah.
those throws. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, man,
He ran
that
the
seems to be a
offense.
harsh criticism, right?
Yeah.
Like that's too bad that he completed almost every pass and
Right.
never threw interceptions or got sacked when he was playing. But anyway, how about this though? As far as other options to look at, is Baker Mayfield interesting to you at all?
So that's interesting to me, certainly as a talking point. Like my feeling is that, Baker Mayfield has never had as good of a year as Kirk Cousins' best years in the NFL, and his worst years have been far worse than any of the years that Kirk had. And so, and I don't think he's going to be very cheap. The only thing that you would have is just youth, and he's not like 22 either. I think he's probably in his late 20s, and so you're hitting him right at his prime. And to think that like what you've gotten to this point is going to be dramatically better moving forward, you'd have to buy into this is the quarterback heaven, uh, and we have seen Kirk play better. Um, and he certainly would have make Baker certainly would have, a fair number of weapons and a good coaching staff to work with. But that to me doesn't feel like a massive upgrade or even any upgrade. It would just be somebody who's younger, and maybe you feel, more comfortable that he's going to have some staying power. But I don't think you're going to be able to get him as a bridge. I think Tampa wants. I think Tampa's going to have. I don't know what their offer is going to be, but I don't think that you're going to beat them with a bridge offer. And so, is that the guy you want for the? Is that the guy? If you're Quasi and Kevin, is that the guy you're putting your career in the hands of? Um, that's the way to look at it. Do you trust him to win you a Super Bowl? And like, does anyone in the league think Baker Mayfield can win a Super Bowl? I don't know. So like that would seem like a consolation, uh, prize, and a one that's more expensive and limiting than you would probably hope, unless we're totally wrong about Tampa's interest in bringing him back. But it speaks to the fact that like if you're trying to get a quarterback through means other than the draft, your options are going to be limited, and it pretty much draws a direct line through most of the history of this franchise is trying to sift through everyone else's quarterback leftovers and find somebody that you think you can, turn into something more than what he's always been.
The way I look at Baker Mayfield is would be sort of in case of emergency,
Yeah.
that if you didn't like any of the quarterbacks that you thought you could get at 11, you didn't get the sense that you could trade up because the top teams are taking those quarterbacks that you actually like. Kirk has told you, sorry guys, Kirk's going to Atlanta, and now you are sort of left holding the bag a little bit. then you call Baker Mayfield. I think initially I was feeling like, oh, well, maybe he would take a Geno Smith short term kind of contract that's more year to year, and you could draft somebody and put him behind him, and it would be a Mayfield, Kyle Trask type of situation as it was in Tampa Bay. But as the offseason goes on here, it feels more and more like he's going to be getting something like $40 million a year, more in the Derek Carr, Daniel Jones type of category of money, and wants commitment too. And that's just too much for me for one 9-8 season in
Yeah.
Tampa Bay where they won a playoff game. I have trouble making it work that way. But if you were in a total desperation mode and you're just not going to be able to get a quarterback in the draft, you could squint and make that work too. Like, this is a big armed guy, could push the ball down the field to Justin Jefferson. He's got some baller to him. He's got some risk taker to him that Kirk Cousins doesn't have. But it's hard to say, all right, if you're going to pay Baker $40 million, then we're in the same conundrum that we've always been in with
Yeah.
Kirk Cousins, where you have a middling quarterback and so forth. Maybe the ceiling at times could be a little higher just because of his nature of taking
Yeah.
risks, but the floor could definitely be lower. Is there anybody that you do like as a bridge option? Because the Darnold thing came up, and I thought, no, actually, I kind of like that. Of course, paired with a rookie.
Yeah, I've warmed to that as well, and thought of like there's for a few reasons. One, there wouldn't be any like I don't know if anybody'd be excited about an entire year of Sam Darnold, but like we've never really seen him in a talented offense. Mixed with a talented coaching staff. And it was, and it's weird. Like the 49ers have such a Midas touch on offensive personnel that like Sam Darnold's stock rose in everyone's eyes just because the 49ers jumped out to sign him. And he didn't get a meaningful snap all year. I don't think, maybe a little bit. But uh, that drew a lot of eyes that the 49ers, who seemed to know their way around offense, wanted him very badly, and signed him right away. I think that's the kind of like um, a more palatable bridge option than certainly Mayfield, because I don't think it'll be a bridge, and I question whether he'll even make the market now after seeing the Mike Evans deal that happened. Like clearly they're planning to move forward with a big time. They're not going to pair Mike Evans at that salary with a rookie quarterback or something like that. I don't think, but to me that sounds more palatable and interesting than Ryan Tannehill or Russell Wilson or some of the other veterans that you really know what you got. And like if the goal is to competitively rebuild and go into the season with at least the hope for something that's not going to be a total wash of a season, then I think that on a very short term basis would make a lot of sense.
One thing that is funny is making the Josh McCown connections. Like, while McCown was there with Sam Darnold, and
Yeah.
then, he's
But Josh
also Drake
McCown
May's high school coach.
played in the NFL for like 42 years, and he played for almost every team. And so like the rush to make the connections with him was hysterical and awesome, because just like the pure volume of time he's spent around football relative to his life means he's connected to almost every single person that ever was connected to the NFL. So of course you can find that. But yes, one of the many is that they were teammates with the Jets, and that he would at least. I don't think you need to hire Josh McCown to recruit Sam Darnold to be your bridge starter, but it would probably make him better if that's who you end up signing.
At least he would have some knowledge about whether that's somebody that could have some upside, or how
Yeah,
his
yeah,
process is, or, how
yeah,
he leads or something. I've never gotten the sense that Darnold is a personality issue. It's usually been a circumstance and also a turnover issue,
yeah.
that he's very risky with the football. I want to ask you about the rest of the team, because so much just has to wait on this one decision. But there were other things addressed at the combine, including the defensive side of the ball, the free agency approach. And I mean, of course, it has to hinge on what they do with Kirk Cousins. But as we start to look at some of the guys coming off the board, like a Mike Evans, but also maybe Christian Wilkins is on the board, what is the feeling for what they can actually do in free agency? Because I have some skepticism about their ability to land big fish. I know that the NFLPA survey says that everyone loves it here. I know that the Wilfs have cash and they're willing to spend it. but there are so many teams that you can make an argument for being on the cusp of competing that also have salary cap space. And one of them is Detroit, one of them is Chicago. But I mean,
Yeah.
especially Detroit's in the NFC Championship game, and they have more cap space than the Vikings. I think it's going to be a bit of a rough ride either way in free agency. And they have to rebuild a lot of their team just through signing players because they have so many openings. Like, what do you think of their approach?
I think not only because they've said it, but because I think it's true. Like I think they're just like putting this enormous amount of weight and pressure on Brian Flores being able to identify players who wouldn't be big fish in the open market, but would be perfect for their or not either perfect for what he wants to do, or he can create a relatively perfect scenario for them. And so I think they'll be active in free agency. They really have never been huge, spenders. They brought in, the Josh Olivers of the world and the Marcus Davenports of the world, but there's never been sort of the like if Christian Wilkins gets onto the open market, like I have a hard time thinking that they'll be in, as much sense as it might make. It doesn't mirror the approach they've taken. And maybe they say, well, he's a young player and he's right, he's ascending and all that kind of stuff. But um, I think if I had to take a informed guess right now as to what their approach will be defensively in free agency, it'll be active, but not high not high end financial. And you'll hear often like, Flo has a plan for him. Flo really likes him. And it almost is the point where like, should he be the assistant general manager in addition to being defensive coordinator? And I get it. Like it's smart team building to, listen to what the coaches need. And if they have the interest and ability to make specific suggestions, then definitely capitalize on it. You want to be careful because you don't want to have a situation where Brian Flores leaves to become a head coach in a year or two, and you're left with a roster of his players that the next coordinator may not follow in the exact same pattern. So you need to not lean too far in that direction. But I think that's probably what they'll do. I agree they need to be active, and they will be, um, especially if they've given up some picks to move up in the draft for a quarterback. That'll be another reason to do it, or they anticipate doing that because free agency comes before the draft. Had a talk 2 years ago with Kyle Shanahan about reversing that because it would make your draft it make your free agency a lot less guesswork, I guess, and not dependent on who you might or might not get in free agency. But regardless, I think that's probably the approach they're gonna do. And there's gonna be some players like I don't think many Vikings fans had heard of Josh Oliver before they signed him. Uh, I'd imagine that will be not unlike a lot of their acquisitions this year.
Yeah, I think that it's going to depend on players that Brian Flores has evaluated and feels like are fits. But also, if you're Brian Flores, you are going to want some high end talent somewhere. I mean,
Yeah,
Josh Metellus was a playmaker for them. We don't know what Harrison Smith is doing. There is no shutdown corner on this team. So if you're just trying to make all signings that are Byron Murphy type of signings,
yeah,
like that's a good player. It's just not a difference maker. And I think Brian Flores understands that you better have some difference makers on your team if you're going to go somewhere, which kind of brings us to the Danielle Hunter. I have just decided Danielle Hunter is gone. I could be
yeah,
wrong about this. It just seems like there's going to be 27 teams that call Danielle Hunter's representation and say, hey, we would like this 16 sack guy on our football team. And I just don't think the Vikings are going to be able to put down the cash to keep him. And also, if you're him, you're like, you had your chance
yeah.
over like
All
5 years and you didn't do it. So
all
see ya.
true.
I just think that he's probably out.
Yeah, and I don't the Vikings have the cash if they want to put it on that, but they clearly don't. Like you said, they had the chance. They were in negotiations last summer. They didn't want to go the lock in long term with him, and that was their value judgment then. Why that would change now, even though he had a great year, I don't know. When pass rushers get on the open market, it's not often that it happens. And especially at that sack number. And but to me, like there's that, but then there's also, and I think Alec Lewis pointed this out in his athletic story today, is like DJ Wana, like he had 8 sacks. He's coming off a really significant injury, and he's probably going to have a pretty big market because people like that after quarterback play, and maybe now receivers, I don't know, but historically, pass rushers are the second most valuable position in football after quarterbacks. And so, like, the Vikings have two guys that combined for what is that, 26, almost 27 sacks last year that are going to be free agents, and one of them they can't franchise, and the other one it doesn't appear that they're are really giving any thought to doing that. And so, like, that's the other part. Is like you're not just talking about like giving way, just basically acknowledging Daniil Hunter is out of our philosophical price zone, but like DJ Wana might be too, which is wild.
And we've left Jordan Hicks out of the conversation
Yes.
mostly as we're talking this offseason. That's been a significant player for them the last 2 years. I thought he was really huge last offseason. No idea if he wants to come back or not. I would think that he would be the guy most likely to return because of just his role in the locker room and his relationship with Flores and so forth. Although his leg did have to be put back on
Yeah.
at last year. So he is getting up there in age as well. Maybe that's something they don't want to do. In the backfield, now they have another need, and I look at it as a need. I know that the fantasy people were going crazy when they got rid of Alexander Madison
Mhm.
for Ty Chandler season, and those I don't know how fantasy drafts work, but those people are always watching every running back situation in the league. I just don't think that it's the Ty Chandler show and the Ty Chandler show only. I think that somebody like Devin Singletary, even like a J.K. Dobbins, I think he's coming off an injury, but there's got to be somebody that's paired with him, and it cannot be a draft pick. It has to be in free agency. So this is just another spot to fill. Or do you feel like it's Ty Chandler season and that's it?
No, I mean, especially when you consider, and I think Quasi even mentioned this during one of his sessions over the in the at the combine, is how many veteran running backs are going to be out there. Like they don't have to get Saquon Barkley, but like there's just such a long list. If you just look at the list of players from the Austin Ecklers to the Zach Moss, like there's so many. Like why wouldn't you like that's a value signing. Like those are you're not going to have to pay a lot. A, because of the position, and B, because of how much the supply is. And there's probably going to be more out there before the end of, before free agency starts. And so I think that's a no brainer that they would, and even if they want to give Ty Chandler the benefit of the doubt or like give him every opportunity to be the primary ball carrier, totally fine with that. But like, there's no reason to not have a veteran, a relatively cheap veteran on the roster as well, for backup slash in case Ty Chandler isn't who you thought he was, and you need somebody else. But like it's like there's just too many out there to think that like you wouldn't dip your toes into that in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and there's such a small sample with Chandler, and there were ups and downs. There were some
Yeah,
great games, and there were some times where you're like, "Nope, that's a run to the left, not to the right,
yeah,
Ty. Sorry,
yeah.
buddy."
Right,
Good
right.
guess though. Like me taking any test in school, it's like, well, it's A, B, C, or D.
Yeah, you
So
had a
we gotta
25% chance. In his case, he had a 50% chance of being right,
right.
left or right.
And sometimes did not. But
Yeah.
uh, last thing for you, Kevin, the timeline of this team and the overall bigger picture with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell as a pairing is interesting to me because at the combine, I had more than one person say to me, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's standing with this team might not be as strong as Kevin O'Connell's. And they also might not entirely be on the same page with this quarterback situation. Now, that's not me like reporting that. That's just people asking about it, saying, are they on the same page? Is he in the good spot as a general manager right now? And I can't answer with certainty, oh yeah, they're all good. We're all set here. And I think that this quarterback decision and what happens with that quarterback is ultimately going to determine that, as it does with every team in the league.
Mhm.
But they're on shorter contracts than usual. They've had a couple of years at this already. You can already tell sometimes with Kevin O'Connell in the way that he talks that he kind of feels it. When you miss the playoffs, the pressure starts to ramp up. Even if you had every reason to miss the playoffs with backup quarterbacks, how do you feel about the overall like synergy there and where they're going as kind of a regime?
Relatively fine. I think there's always this built-in uh, difference of approach between a coach and a general manager. It's almost like a check and balance that you would want to have, and that the coach, if you take the quarterback situation, the coach wants the best quarterback for next year. Totally understandable. Like, he wants to win next year. That's what he's being paid to do. He's not being paid to win in 2026. The general manager is being paid to create winners over time, including 2026. And so, like, that's the case everywhere. And so, to the extent that anybody's reading in, like, sort of headbutting going on over the quarterback situation, to me, it comes across as the complete, like, almost healthy uh, checks and balance of a coach versus a GM. So, the fact that, I don't read into anything like that. And on the bigger picture of Kwesi, like, my own thought is, uh, the owners, parted ways with a longtime experienced GM who had been a GM, for more than 20 years in the NFL, not just the 16 or so he was, or Rick Spielman or whatever it was, with the Vikings. So they hired somebody who was completely inexperienced, by admission, who was going to approach things in a different way, have a different process, a different way of thinking, a different way of leading. And to me, like, you there's the thing last year that popped up, let Kwesi cook. Like, you've got to let it play out, unless you get to the other side of this draft and you view this as being a colossal catastrophe. um, then maybe, like, his job performance becomes under review by ownership. But to me, you have to, if you've hired this new structure that has to be implemented, and knowing it can't be implemented uh, at the snap of a finger, um, like to pull the plug on it, or even to question it severely after 2 years, would seem to reveal a lot less certainty and about the decision made, and the approach that decision carried, than it should have. And so it doesn't mean you just let something that you've clearly decided is not working to continue because you owe it to that person or you owe it to yourself. But, like, um, I guess I would be, everybody hears different things throughout the league about, and it's true that the drafts here have not been great, and they're in a position where they've put everything into this offseason basket, and, like, they're, like, in some ways, Kwesi's career is come down to this next few months, and that's a lot of pressure to have put on yourself, but that's where it's at. But, like, I think that I don't sense any more separation between them than the typical coach GM having different job requirements. And I think that if the if the Kwesi job performance thing really comes under review after 2 years, then that means that they did not have a very good process of getting to this point.
Yeah, I agree with all that, and I wanna see the plan come to fruition before I decide what I think of the regime and what I think of Kwesi adofo-mensah. And I also think that if he's operating differently behind the scenes than you would have expected from a Rick Spielman, well, that's who you hired. You hired somebody who was going to lean more on the numbers, and somebody who wasn't an old school football scout and may have spoken a different language and come from a different environment. And I think if you're not leaning into that, then you should have hired somebody who was more of an old school football person.
Yeah,
At the same time, it's a very different environment from anything else in the United States of America to be inside of a football front office. And so I guess I am curious about just how somebody who came up in a different environment is able to step into that. And also, making a lot of people happy is very hard in a front office. If Kwesi adofo-mensah was told, rebuild the roster on your laptop over, just
yeah,
you, like you would do it on a video game, well, he might have really good plans for that. But selling an ownership on things, selling a front office, leading a front office, all those things are challenges. Making a lot of people happy and not being afraid to make some people unhappy,
yeah.
very hard things to do. Anybody who's managed a hot dog stand would tell you how hard it is to manage people and manage customers and manage ownership and so forth. And that could all be different challenges for him to go along with the difficulty of building a roster. But I want to see the rest of the picture. I feel
Yeah.
like we've followed along with the track that they laid out with the words competitive rebuild. Show me the rest.
Yeah.
And if they do bring back Cousins, my mentality changes completely. My mentality changes to, all right, well, if this is what you're doing, then every draft pick now matters so much. Every signing matters so much. And if you finish third in the division, then see ya.
Yeah.
Let's go get somebody
That's
else because
right.
this didn't work. So I think we have to grade this after we know what they do at quarterback.
And also, the other thing I was thinking about as you were talking is that, um, I mean, to include Kevin O'Connell in that, two young and relatively inexperienced people who had not, like Kevin O'Connell wasn't a coach for nearly as long as most coaches are before they become a head coach, and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah wasn't a front office executive for nearly as long as most people are, and that's fine. Like there are many ways to peel the apple, but if you like you said, okay, like this is what we're gonna do. We're turning things over to a couple of young guys. Like there's also like the implicit and maybe even explicit expectation of like letting them grow, like and knowing that the decisions Kwesi made his first year might not be as good as the ones he makes his third year. Whereas if you hired an experienced guy, you would expect those decisions to be on point from the start. And you're banking on the growth and the potential, just as you would a young player that isn't going to be as good in his first career game as he might be in his 30th career game. And and we don't usually think about coaches and GMs in those ways because there's only 32 of each of them, and there's thousands of players, and they come and go. But like that's really what they did. They said like I mean they didn't say it, but like that's what their actions told us is that we are going to hire some people we think are very good candidates for these jobs, and they have displayed a lot of potential and room to grow. And if we're gonna and you're gonna judge them, either of them, solely based on the decisions they made in years 1 and 2, and not give them a chance to realize the potential that you were hiring them for in the first place, then again, not a good process.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'd like to see patience here, but asking for patience from NFL owners might as well be asking me not to eat Taco Bell. So it just, it's
Very
not.
fair.
Our jobs would be a lot less entertaining if owners were patient. Then we'd just say, "Oh, well, I guess we're going to have to wait and see what happens." But in this case, the next time you and I talk on a podcast will probably be when we know who the quarterback is going to be or if they're going to draft one. So I really appreciate you taking the time to preview Decision 2024, and
Sure.
we'll talk again very soon. Thanks for your time, man.
Thanks for having me.